Welcome to the Keep Baseball Great podcast, where we're all about reminding baseball fans why they love the game. In today's episode, I get to talk to a broadcaster for the Texas Rangers, a host on MLB on Fox and SiriusXM's MLB Network Radio, the great CJ Nitkowski. And after our conversation and a quick Google search, I have dubbed CJ the most interesting man in baseball. After our interview, you'll quickly understand why, but we had a fun conversation. You get to hear how he's connected to an iconic LA Dodgers moment. You'll be blown away by how many of the top pitching performances in the past 20 years he's been a part of, what he and Michael Jordan have in common and how they started their baseball careers, plus a couple great insights and wisdom that CJ has gained through the game of baseball. I've always enjoyed CJ on the broadcast, but after this interview, he's quickly one of my favorite people in baseball. I hope you enjoy these stories and insights that CJ gives us. So here's my interview with CJ. Well, CJ, hey, thanks, man, so much for joining us on the Keep Baseball Great podcast. It's a super privilege to have you on.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Drew. I mean, this is the right time to do it, right? A lot of us sitting around with, unfortunately, not a ton to do. So this is the time to get guests. We've been fortunate. I do radio for MLB Network Radio, and we've had way more guests than we usually would. I do a morning show at 7 to 10 Eastern. And for a while, we were only going 7 to 9 Eastern. And the idea of getting guests, during the season, almost forget about it. Maybe a writer or two that's up at that time of day. But now it's been a little bit easier. So this is the right time to try to get some guests and practice your interviewing skills.
That's right. Well, I love it. It's a benefit for me. And again, it's a privilege to just kind of grab somebody like you and jump on the podcast. So thank you.
Oh, I'm glad to do it.
Yeah. So the Keep Baseball Great podcast is really just all about highlighting what keeps baseball great. What is it that people love about the game? And I know baseball kind of in the past has had its downfalls with, the cheating scandal recently, kind of steroids, but and even outside of MLB, and I think you have a couple boys that play baseball, right?
I do. Yeah, I have a 20-year-old and a 12-year-old with a girl in the middle. But yes.
Oh man, so like youth baseball these days is just way different than what it was kind of when we were kids, and there's just a lot of negative things that can come with that. A lot of great things that come with it, but a lot of negative that does. But Keep Baseball Great is just all about kind of learning from those, but highlighting what's so good about it. And I'm a Rangers fan, so I've been able to hear you on the broadcast and hear your stories that you'd sell. The way you rattle stats off is incredible. And just the
computers are good for that. That's mostly
right.
Definitely not off the top of my head. That's either making sure I do my research, or a lot of times, and it's so interesting, just not that this was what it's about, but just the progress of what I learned in broadcasting. I used to only do about one game a week when I worked for FS1. Okay. And so I had an entire week to prepare, and I would over prepare like crazy and probably use about 10% of what I had. And once I started doing Rangers games, and I was really nervous to take the job. It was a job I really wanted, but I was also nervous because I went from doing 15 games a year to 100. And when I run out of things to talk about, and what would my preparation look like? And what I learned over my first couple of years was basically how to streamline my prep and get a real good feel for what I think would come up during the game. You're still not going to have it, all of it. There's going to be some things where something happens during the game and you have a thought and you start kind of searching and looking for some comparisons. And if they're not there, they're not there. And you got to let it go. You don't force it in. The game usually dictates, but I've gotten myself to the point where I think I know where I want to go. But it's such a fascinating time in that regard, because you're sitting there, of course, with an audience. You're never going to please everybody. You're not going to be able to engage all 100% of the people the way that you wish you could. But you're trying to find that balance in this new age of stats and stories, and say, okay, well, don't lose the fans that have watched this game forever that aren't interested in kind of where we are with some of the new analytics, but don't leave behind the newer ones either. That are hungry for more. And how do you balance that? I don't think any of us get it perfect, but I'll take some chances and push it a little bit. And we love talking the game, but we love some of the numbers too, and the stories that are behind them.
Yeah, well, I mean, from my point of view, and I'm one of those. I'm a big baseball fan, big Rangers fan, but I'm also, I'm kind of right there in the middle where, like, I love to hear both. I love the strategy of the game and to hear that, but I also love hearing just stories of random things that kind of pop up throughout the game. So
And blowouts lend themselves to the conversations that completely go off the rails too.
Right. Hopefully not too many of those
No.
with the Rangers, but it tends to happen.
It happens.
That's cool. Well, so with that, we like to ask our guests just kind of 5 questions that I've kind of narrowed down what I feel like helps us all keep baseball great. And I'd love to kind of jump into those with you.
Let's do it, man. I'm excited.
All right, sweet. So the first one is really all about history. So I love looking about the history of the game and just watching documentaries on kind of how it grew. And even, I'm 41. And so, the history for me even kind of goes, 70s, 60s and into that. But so for you, what's one of your favorite baseball historical moments that you kind of just always look back on and just enjoy?
So I think there's a lot of them, and I think that there's a lot that people share. And so then I try to get personal ones. I've been fortunate to play the game, but then you have the ones that you go back in history and watch. And I think what I've been fortunate because I've played to be able to then connect them together. So as an example, as a kid, the Kirk Gibson home run, right? I'm a little bit older than you are. I'm 47 years old, but that was such a big deal when I was a kid, and you get chills every single time that you would watch that replay. It was amazing, right? And so to see that, and as a kid, and then everyone, do the fist pump as you go around first base, or maybe practice him limping up to the box the way that he did, like that's a great moment in the game's history. Well, I was fortunate enough to call Kirk Gibson a teammate at the very end of his career when I got to Detroit. I got traded to Detroit in 1995, right at the deadline. He played for a few more weeks, and then he actually retired before the season was over. And I had a locker next to him. So that kind of moment in history, which was a really big one, but then to walk into that clubhouse and call him a teammate, he was pretty hard on me. He was definitely an old school guy. But now and have the opportunity to continue to call him a friend in the broadcast world. Every time we play Detroit, I run across him. We always have very lengthy and fun conversations. And I mean, it's his passion for the game is absolutely amazing in his memory. And I think he's really good at what he does. So I like the idea that I can connect something like that, like a really cool moment in recent history, but then the fact that there's a tie-in and one that I'm really appreciative, a relationship that I'm really grateful to be able to have. So that would be one. And that would give you a couple that I just was fortunate enough to witness. There have been 4 20 strikeout games in our game's history in 9 innings. For whatever reason, they don't like to give Randy Johnson credit. Randy Johnson struck out 20 in 9 innings, but the game went extra innings, right? So that one doesn't count. Roger Clemens did it twice. Kerry Wood did it once, and then we saw Max Scherzer do it. Well, I happened to be at 2 of those 4. I actually pitched in the Roger Clemens game when he struck out 20 in 1996. That was at Old Tiger Stadium, and he had done it 10 years apart. He did it in 1986, and then he did it in 1996. So that was cool. And then there was another personal tie-in. I guess it was 4 or 5 years later. I lived in Houston for a while, down in Sugar Land, and of course Roger lives in Houston. And I started working out with him in the off seasons because I knew his trainer, Brian McNamara. I know the whole story kind of blew up in a real negative way eventually down the road. But so then to be able to pitch in that game, be part of that little piece of history, just because I'm in the box, I happen to just be in the box score. But then to be able to work out with him a few years later was kind of cool. But then I was at the Kerry Wood game too, as a member of the Astros. In 1998, and easily the most dominating performance I've ever seen. Some say maybe the greatest that the game has ever seen. So that was another little cool moment that I got to see in person. And then the final one was Randy Johnson's perfect game against the Atlanta Braves in 2004. I happened to be sitting in the bullpen for that one as well. And usually when you're in these spots as a player, on the other side of it, you kind of root for it a little bit, not out loud, not in front of your teammates, right? So when Kerry Woods got, whatever it was, 18 strikeouts going into the 9th inning, I'm like, come on, man, you got 2 more.
You got it.
Like you want to see it. You can't say it out loud, but you want to see it. I will tell you that when Randy Johnson was working on that perfect game, I didn't want to see it because we were struggling really, really bad. And at that moment, we ended up winning the division. I got traded away before it was all said and done. But it was not the right time.
Yeah.
It was just kicking us when we were down with the Atlanta Braves. So I know you wanted one. I can't help but get a little bit long and talk about a couple of different ones. And then I got to play with Randy. I played with Randy Johnson before that, actually, in 98 when he was with us with the Astros, of course, traded over for those couple of months. But to me, those are some of the coolest ones I got to witness in person.
Yeah. I mean, you can't really narrow it down, especially with the amount of baseball you've been able to experience. It's kind of hard to narrow down, but those stories are great. That's incredible that you've been to that many just big pitching games. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I did get to see Eddie Murray hit his 500 home run against us
Okay.
in Baltimore, which is a pretty cool one too. But there was a massive rain delay, so it didn't happen until I think it might have been after midnight by the time he actually hit the home run. So there wasn't nearly as many fans around, but it was still kind of cool to sit in the bullpen and watch it happen.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I know earlier we kind of talked about you have kids that played, and I know again with the history that you've played. Experiencing baseball with family and friends is a big thing, you know, especially for us that don't get to go on and play in the big leagues. But even now, you as a dad, what are some moments that you kind of have shared either with family or friends that just kind of help you look back and enjoy the game even more for it?
Yeah, so I was introduced to baseball by my father, and I grew up in suburban New York, and we went to maybe 1 or 2 games a year. We lived about 30 or so minutes out, but we would drive to Westchester County and then kind of take the train in. So like everybody, I think like so many other kids have that same memory of kind of walking through the stadium and getting to your seats and just the excitement of going to games as a kid, right? That's where the passion really, I think, for me started. It was just an amazing thing to sit there, look at that unbelievably green grass and sit in Yankee Stadium and watch baseball games and have that dream that millions and millions of kids have. So I think that's how it kind of gets, locked into your heart a little bit. I will tell you that something I never realized until almost the back end of my career. When you're playing professionally, it's your job. Like, you love it, but it's your job. And for a guy like me with such an up and down career, some highs, but a lot of lows and a lot of moving around and a lot of stress, quite honestly. And you're fighting because you love it and it's what you do best, but it can really be taxing. And it was. And for me and my family, my wife's been such a trooper through the whole thing. But something that a friend had said to me, I guess I was probably about 12 or 13 years into my career. He came to visit me in Japan. I played in Japan for a couple of years. And what they did was they gave me 4 tickets to bring basically both sets of my parents, or bring my family over, excuse me. And then they gave us a couple of extra tickets to bring other friends and family over the course of the year. Well, my second year there, I gave those tickets to some friends of mine. And so they got to fly over to Japan, which they never would have done otherwise, and come experience that. And what my friend had said to me, he's like, did you ever stop and think about for a second how your career, and you're just chasing your dream and doing what you love, has gained experiences for so many other people? And I don't. When you're in the middle of playing it, you just don't think about those kinds of things, right? The idea that they would fly to Japan and watch me play was something that he was very appreciative of and really cool. I joke around with my now wife, but she was my girlfriend at the time. She was still in college, drove to watch me pitch against the Philadelphia Phillies in 1995, a game that was on ESPN, and watched me get my first win. And I beat Kurt Schilling 1-0 in a game, and I didn't have very many good starts, but that was a really fun one.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so a moment like that, and she was there, and about 20 or so other of my friends and family that were there, people that drove out to Cincinnati to see my big league debut, like things they would have never otherwise done, like these little trips and things that have happened, and the experiences that they get from it. For my kids, they were a little bit young toward the end of my career, but the idea of getting to travel to places like Japan and Korea, go to school in Japan because baseball brought me there. All of those kind of experiences, I think, for our family and for our friends. Again, not what you're thinking about when you're in the middle of it. Right. Toward the end, when he said it to me, and then kind of as you're done and you look back and reflect, like, oh yeah, that was really fun, and that was cool. I'm glad they got to be there for it. So those kind of things just pile up, but you're not really taking note of them until it's all said and done.
Yeah, even for me, like as a dad, and not playing in the big leagues, but even now, like my son is just turned 13. Even now, like I look back and think, man, I should have really enjoyed those baseball moments, or enjoyed just playing catch. Like it was just kind of a thing we did,
It's hard.
Yeah, but now it's
like, so much going on. The parents have so much going on.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I guess that is hindsight. It's like, I don't know how I got here, or how did these years pass, but here we are.
It goes quick.
So learning just to enjoy the moment, like you said, that's really good. Okay, so the third question is life lessons. I know baseball is probably, I mean, all sports kind of give you life lessons and team and all that, but I feel like baseball is such a unique one because of the, like the batting average, and it's just such a negative game, and it's hard to kind of think back on those things. But as you play baseball, what are some life lessons that you've kind of just, grabbed as you played, whether you personally or maybe something with your kids, but something that you kind of grabbed onto that you kind of always remember?
So there's definitely a few. And I think what you're talking about a little bit is that failure that you get in the game, right? That you can
Right.
fail so often and then still be considered to be someone who's been successful.
Right.
And really learning through that. I would tell you that I shot through the system with the Reds. They were very aggressive. That was their first round pick. And they sent me to AA in 1994. Actually got to play in the same league as Michael Jordan in the Southern League and face him a few times. And if for anybody that's been watching The Last Dance, it was kind of funny. I think it was in episode 7. Where Jerry Reinsdorf was on, and he said, we sent him to AA, and nobody starts their professional career in AA. And I nudged my wife, and I was like, "Hey, I did." I'm the other one. And it was kind of funny. So I kind of shot through the system really quickly and got to the big leagues very fast. And that maybe not such a great idea, but that's kind of the way that it went down. Yeah. And when I got there, I had a couple of really nice starts. Didn't get a win just yet, but things were going pretty well. And then I had 3 just absolutely horrific starts and got sent down. And so at that moment in my life, I had failed on the biggest stage that I've ever failed on in my career. And it really shook me. I mean, it really did. It took me a long time, like that year and then a lot of next year as well, to kind of get through that and really understand it and not beat myself up so much. So I would say that not only learning about failure and your ability to bounce back, you just have to, whether it's baseball or it's life. We know like life can absolutely just beat you up and beat you down and really, especially now in this stage, this day and age of social media, where there's enough people there to insult you or argue with you or whatever it may be, that you got to be careful about how you take those things and how you recover from them, right? Those are really, really important lessons, I think, that you learn in the game. But then I think probably one of the biggest things, the biggest regrets, and it took me a long time to learn this one about myself, was that I never gave myself credit for anything I did well. So like I said, I first came up and 3 of my first starts were really good, but I didn't care. They were over with. It didn't matter. But when I had the bad ones, boy, did I think about those bad ones a lot and everything that I did wrong. And, again, where my value was and how I viewed myself as a player, where my confidence was. And I look back as I get older and say, hey, you know what, you did that well, or be proud of that, or whatever it may be, or that you had this nice run here for a couple of months, but I never did that as a player. And so that's one of those things I remember as I was kind of transitioning out of baseball, or I had a soft landing. I thought I was going to be done for like 6-7 years. And it finally did happen. Like every year I was like, oh, this is probably it. This is probably it. But the phone kept ringing. But then as I made that transition out of baseball, I remember talking to someone about the things that you learned in the game to make sure that you don't make those mistakes in your second life, whatever your second career is. And that's something that's really important to me. Not that you're arrogant or cocky or anything like that, but just not to, and I never had a problem really with critics. That stuff didn't bother me very much. It's going to happen. It comes with the territory. But if something goes bad, don't harp on it, and don't all of a sudden then wrap up your identity in that one bad moment, right? There's a reason why you're doing the job that you're doing. I've been very fortunate in broadcasting so far to get a national job pretty quickly throughout my career, especially for not being a named player. And then when this Rangers opportunity opened up, and it was something I wanted really badly, and to get that opportunity, I just love what I do right now in the organization that I do it with. And so when I mess up, whether it's having a bad broadcast or maybe a bad inning, or you mess up a call, it's going to happen. And then people are there to remind you about it all day long and say, you know what, okay, don't get caught up in that stuff the way you did as a player. Don't get caught up in the negativity. Don't focus on everything that you've done bad. Give yourself some credit once in a while. Again, doesn't mean to be arrogant, doesn't mean to be cocky, but do not just absorb only the negative things that happen in your life, and then that's how you identify yourself.
Yeah. I do graphic design for a living also, and I am my own worst critic, and I think that is exactly kind of hit it right on the head. It's what other people think, it is what it is, but what I think of whatever I do is can be either really good or really bad, and hold me back on certain things too. But
yeah, it's tough. I'll tell you something real quick too. When I was right before I got to the Rangers in 2002, I sat down and did one of these personality tests, and I didn't really believe in it at all. But some guy was like, hey, I'm working with this company. Please come try this. I said, all right, I'll do it. And basically all it was about 300 words, and you had to check off whether or not that word described you. I'm like, come on, this can't be like accurate at all, right? So I fill this thing out, and then they spit out these results. And what they do is they kind of compare you to some of the absolute best in the field, and they kind of gather all this data. And so it comes back, and it gives me kind of these couple of things to really focus on. One of them was deference, meaning that you allow a lot in, instead of just really staying focused on what you're supposed to. And I mean, that hit it on the head for sure for me. I think about every time I change teams, and I would go to a new one to be spring training. I have to throw a bullpen, right? And instead of just me and the catcher throw my bullpen because that's all I could control, I noticed every person that was watching. There's the GM there, there's the pitching coach there, there's the manager over there, there's a really good pitcher on our team there, whatever it may be. And all of that stuff I would allow into my thought process, which meant that took away really from the task at hand. Right. So that's one thing I learned about myself just by checking off those words. But probably the biggest one, and I actually wrote this down on a piece of paper for a couple of years and made sure I always had it to look at, to remind myself, was ultimately to be less self-critical, kind of like what you were talking about, and then more aggressive. Because one of the things the guy said to me was, I bet you're, and I don't know you that well, but he goes, I bet you're probably a pretty nice guy and a really nice teammate, and you care about people, you care about your teammates, which I felt like I did. I absolutely felt like I always would be invested as my team and my teammates as people. He's like, that's great, but here's some things that where it's not working out so well for you, that part of your personality is that you're ultra self-critical, which was true. But then there was some aggressiveness lacking because of it. And I was like, man, that is so true. And I never knew that about myself until somebody kind of pointed it out. And those are the things you learn. You wish you knew that from day one. Right. Do you remember Jose Lima? Do you remember that name at all? Jose Lima was a right-handed pitcher, and he was such a fun guy. And unfortunately, he passed away much too early of a heart attack. But one thing I always admired about him was that, early in his career, we were both in Detroit. He was not very good either. He struggled. He could have 5 bad starts in a row and just get absolutely crushed. As soon as he had that one good one, he's dancing after the game. He's having a blast. He's acting like he's probably going to win the Cy Young Award that year. And I always envied that about him. Because I was like, why are you not beating yourself up over the last 5 bad starts that you had? And those people that can do that stuff, they just forget and move on. I've always been envious of, but I think it's a really good trait.
Yeah, I totally agree. And now that you say that, I'm jotting notes down for myself here. I love that. So the next one is giving back. And I know with MLB, some of those big name players, they've got platforms and they're able to give back and do really good things. And baseball offers that platform for them. But and it looks different for guys like myself who give back in different ways, with whether it's Little League or just with my son or whatever. But have you been able to been a part of a situation where you were able to give back, or maybe someone gave to you through the game of baseball that just kind of really stuck with you?
So there's a couple of different ones, and there's so many great opportunities now, especially one of the things I love that when we see with some of the GoFundMe stuff and how easy it is, something pops up with someone. As an example, we had someone at FS1 who had gotten breast cancer. All of a sudden she was in really bad shape and needed some help. Boom, you can slide right in, you can do it anonymously. If that's what you prefer. I kind of like to do that. I know some people say, hey, put your name on this and maybe it'll encourage other people. I struggle with that because I don't want the arrows pointed at me at all. So I do love those little kind of sneaky things that you could do there, just help somebody out and be an encouragement. I would say that most of the stuff that we've done over our time has usually been faith-based. For the most part, there was an organization, we used to live in Houston, that we supported really consistently that just helped families that were underserved for a really long time. There is now an organization in Dallas that I've only donated to, but I want to get a little bit more involved. Again, I'm always worried about, I don't want the arrows getting pointed back at me. Right. I've gotten a couple of nice notes from this organization called Hope Farm, which is out in Fort Worth, which does a really nice, I love their vision and what they do. And their focus is on youth risk. Youth, they're at risk. A lot of single moms, and it's a Christian-based organization which gives them a place to come to do a real lot of things. And so I'd plan, and we haven't gotten there yet, but one of the things I want to do for them is to get them a little bit more involved in opportunities to come to games, maybe share something, with broadcasting, and whenever I get, it pulls at me a little bit when I think about children that are brought up without dads, right? The dads that have decided to leave. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that happens, but especially ones that just aren't there, that they decide they don't want to be in the picture. My father was in the Navy for 20 years. When he was done, he taught ROTC at a high school. And and this was in New York, and he worked in some pretty tough spots in New York City and Passaic, New Jersey. And he would bring kids home every once in a while on the weekend. Now, we didn't live like in the country, but it was kind of the suburbs, just to get them out of there and to give them some opportunities. And so that was something that he always kind of planted in me a little bit, like if there's somebody not there for them, perhaps there's opportunities for you to step in. So that one, to me, that organization, I've only supported them financially so far, but one that I'd like to take a little bit farther, because that's something that to me is really, really important. But we've spread stuff around a little bit more on the financial side, which, we're grateful that we're able to do that when we can. I think from a time standpoint, It's weird for me living in Atlanta, not being in Dallas as much. It's a little bit tougher. I have my parents here and I have younger kids that are still in school and trying to get through that. We'd like to be a little bit more full-time involved in the community in Dallas. With time, I do love coaching. I've coached basketball. I've coached baseball. And just try, you mentioned this earlier, some of the chaos that's going on in
right.
sports, and just try to come in and be a voice of reason
Yep.
and try to make it as good of an experience as possible. It doesn't mean that we're not a little bit competitive, but trying to keep it all in perspective. I'll even joke around with the kids. I doubt any of you guys are going to the NBA. Maybe that'd be a nice surprise, but and then try to go and kind of go from there and really make it a positive experience. So there's a handful of different things. I've never, it's you always try to figure out like where you're called and what your, really maybe what your purpose is. I've never been called to be someone that started my own foundation. I prefer to support others as much as possible, and people do amazing work.
Yep.
And so whenever we feel that there's something that's pulling at us, we're always happy to lend a hand.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know, going back to the youth sports, I mean, the biggest thing I remember is hanging out with my friends and getting the snow cone afterwards. Yeah. And so to put all the pressure on the kids these days like that, it's crazy, but it's incredible to be able to kind of step in and just have a different voice than probably what the majority is.
Well, you know what? So there may be, I joked around about this on Twitter the other day, but this social distancing, obviously we wish this virus wasn't here, but there may be an upside down the road, right? The idea that parents can't go near the dugout and there's no meetings after the game. Like I always joke around that. I don't care what the score was. After the game, whichever coach has the shortest meeting, that's the winner. Because listen, we're boys. We're supposed to be men. Like you got me for like 2 minutes and that's it. And I'm out. Like I said earlier, I'm paying attention to everything else that's going on and not listening to you probably anymore. So I'm big on let them play, teach them some stuff, and then go get that snow cone and get out of there.
That's right. That's funny. I think I actually said something very similar to that too. I was like, if we all just said, okay, the kids can go play sports, but parents can't. How many parents would be like, oh yeah, we're good with that? Like would, I feel like it'd be like a big uproar. And so
it would be different. I will tell you this real quick too. I had a little kind of baseball workout here in Georgia. They've relaxed some things. They're actually going to start some youth baseball here pretty soon. And so I had 5 of the kids over for just a little bit of a workout. And at the end, we were playing wiffle ball, and all 5 dads were there. And I said, basically, and it's short enough where you can hit a home run. And I said, if you hit a home run, if you don't hit a home run, you get 2 pitches. Then you have to sprint a double because we were doing some running at the end of practice. I said, but if you do hit a home run, then your dad has to run an inside the park home run. They were all about it. The idea that they could make their parents run and make them a little bit tired was a lot of fun. So something to think about, those kind of things to incorporate into practices and make it fun.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the financially giving back. And I look forward to some opportunities in the future to be able to do that through this also. But I just feel like giving back is just a real big part of what makes ball great for me. And I know for a lot of others too. You talked a lot about, kids that don't have dads. I know for me now, and even some of my favorite movies, the last shot of the movie is them playing catch with the dad. And so I know I cherish that moment with my kid. And so to be able to give back to something to help support those kids is incredible. So
we'll think about that too, like how we're introduced to the game.
Yeah.
Right? I feel like most of us, that's how it happens. It happens at home for our game, baseball, because it's a tough one to just kind of pick up with your friends, right? It's not, you can, but that's usually not how we're introduced to the game. Of course, you can go play basketball by yourself in your driveway or, at the street or at school, whatever it may be, but it doesn't happen nearly as much as baseball. You can play football in the street or do whatever with a couple of guys, but baseball is the sport that I've always felt like is introduced at home. Like the most exciting time for me as a kid was watching my dad pull up after work, and I'm sure he was exhausted and just nagging him to come outside and play catch with me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think where a lot of us do get introduced, and it's very easy. And I got to check myself every once in a while. We've had a long day, or I just was traveling, or I'm worn out. Just say, oh, let's do it later. And I got to check in with myself once in a while and say, there might not be a later. You may know what's going to happen. They're going to grow up before you know it. They're not going to want to play catch anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
Take advantage of every one of those opportunities as much as you can.
That's cool. Well, so with all those questions and all the stories, kind of the last one I always kind of lean towards is just the fun of the game. And we've kind of touched on a lot of that, but everything kind of culminates into one thing, and it just makes you smile, makes you have fun, and baseball does that in different ways. And so I know with as much experience as you had playing the game, traveling, and doing all that, what are some of your just most fun moments you've had in baseball that you kind of remember?
So rarely do they actually happen on the field. Some do, but the majority of the memories that you hear players talk about when they're not talking about the big moments or telling stories for an interview will have to do with either in the dugout, in the clubhouse,
Right.
on the team plane, maybe on the bus. Like, there's no media there. It's where you can kind of let down a little bit. And you take this group of 25, the number will be higher this year, but usually 25 guys, usually in their 20s, and this is not a group of guys you get to pick, right? You're kind of thrown together. So there's always that, there's going to be some friction here and there. It just kind of comes with the territory. But I always say this, that now that I can look back, and I didn't think about it at the time, but one of the things that I'm most appreciative of is the players from all around the world that I've got to play with, right? I mean, those experiences of playing with players from Japan, from Korea, I actually got to play in both of those countries as well, and play in those ballparks. But from the Dominican, from Venezuela, from Mexico, from Canada, like you get all this huge melting pot from people that have loved the game just like you did when you were a little kid and playing catch with your dad, and however they were introduced into the game. And then they all now are riding those buses with you, fighting that same fight. And then the way that you unwind, whether it's playing cards on the plane, maybe having an adult pop once in a while, dressing up rookies, those kinds of things are always so much fun. Or when you were a rookie, getting dressed up like I was and having to walk through customs in Toronto in a ridiculous suit. It's kind of the way that it goes. And one year we took the guys and we dressed them up in Super Friends outfits. As we landed in Boston, it was after a day game, so it was still decent out. It wasn't too late. Stopped the bus about 5 or 6 blocks before we get to the hotel and make them get out and walk the rest of the way. And then all of a sudden, you got every Superman and Spider-Man and Robin walking down the street and taking video. Those kind of, and the guys that played along and had fun with it. Those are the great memories. I mean, there's just so many of them. We had a conversation the other day. We were talking, I was doing this with Fox Sports Detroit. And we were talking about closing out Old Tiger Stadium. And we got, we were fortunate to be on that roster and finish out what was a really cool historic stadium. And one of the guys, Brian Moeller, was telling a story about how we actually stayed. The season wasn't over. We finished the ballpark, but we still had a road trip in Minnesota. But they decided they were going to fly out the next day, which you really never do. And he slept in the stadium that night. And he was looking for a souvenir from the stadium that he wanted to have. And there was a sign that hung over the visiting or the home clubhouse. I can't remember, outside, that basically said, no visiting media 30 minutes before game time. And it was a really old sign. You could tell it had been there for a really long time. I was like, man, I'd love to have that sign. And so he took the sign down and kind of hid it in his locker. Well, we take off for Minnesota. And he said when he was there, he got a phone call from security because they saw him on the video cameras. And he's a super nice guy. And it's not like him to want to steal anything. It's like, oh, who will care, right? And so they had video of him actually stealing that sign from Old Tiger Stadium. And he said, okay, I understand. And they took it back and you get it. But those kind of things that happen like that over the years, those kinds of fun stories and guys being goofy. One of the other gifts that this game gives you is that no matter how old you are when you're done playing, for me, I got to pitch till I was 39. I was a couple months short of reaching my 40th birthday, which was kind of a silly goal. But no matter how old you are, you don't actually ever have to grow up. Like you still get to be a kid or a boy that's on that high school team or that little league team and act dumb. And I know you got to be a little bit more careful now and you're going to get called out for it once in a while. But I think it's that part of remaining a kid and doing goofy and sometimes dumb things with your buddies from all around the world is what makes this game so much fun to play professionally.
That's awesome. And I know, so you're doing a podcast with Ryan.
Yep, Ryan Spielborgs.
Spielborgs, that's right.
Yep.
One Man's Trash. And I've just got a kick out of watching some of those, just hearing the stories that those guys, they're showing whatever they have and hearing the stories. So that, for me, that's a lot of fun kind of hearing those things. But give me one. You got a shelf full there. Give me one of the.
Yeah, so it was because of what was happening with all the downtime. First of all, for Ryan and I, and it was like, hey, we got to start cleaning up some things that we put off for years. Then we started going through some things that we had collected. So there's a bunch of baseballs back there. I think that one brown glove. I actually told that story. It was a lefty closer that I played with in Japan. This guy was like 5'7" and about 145 pounds. He was the smallest pitcher you ever seen in your life. But he pitched like he was 6'5", 250. And he was just such a character and a lot of fun. And those are the kind of things that, you really enjoy. You can see over I guess it's my left shoulder, that NYPD hat. I don't know if you can see that really well up there. Yeah. So these were the ones that I can reach it here. So I played for the Mets. I grew up in New York, but I only played for the Mets for 1 month. It just happened to be September of 2001. Oh, wow. Right? And so I was there during 9/11. And of course we wore the hats to kind of honor the first responders. So this was the hat that I got to wear for that month. The season went a little bit later that year, the regular season. So, something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, but just all these kind of, fun things and things that we would give. We started giving away some of the things that we had. That red glove that is right there is a Korean glove that I had. You can see my Rangers hat up there. Yeah. So that kind of goes, that almost represents beginning to end. The red hat is my St. John's hat where I went to college. Okay. The orange hat is the hat that I threw my last pitch in, which was the Toros del Estes, which is a winter ball team in the Dominican. Okay. The D is a Doosan kind of throwback hat. And I got my Rangers hat up there as well. Some fun baseballs that I've collected over the years. It's funny. I sit there and you look at all those balls. I'm actually not a real big collector. Some of those, there's a ball in there, I think from like 1983 from a home run I hit in Little League that my dad wrote a note on. So there's fun little stuff like that. But I do have a Michael Jordan signed baseball from playing against him in the Southern League in 1994. Bob Shepard, who was the PA announcer at Yankee Stadium all those years, and just someone that I admired. I have an autographed baseball from him, one of my favorites, basically the Chuck Morgan of New York. Right. And if you think about the great Chuck Morgan, great voice, great personality, and what he means, right? You hear his voice, right? You bring your son and say to a Ranger game, and that's the voice that he hears. And even for 100%. Me coming through as a visiting player, like I knew, and I didn't know who Chuck was when I came through as a visiting player. But like, oh yeah, that's the Ranger guy. That's the voice, yeah. Yeah, it's just that connection that you make, even with PA announcers. I think it's so cool, and it's just part of the memories if you're someone who, even attends just a handful of Major League games a year. So it was really cool to kind of go through our stuff. A lot of junk in there. There's a Juan Gonzalez bobblehead back there to go along with the Dontrell Willis as well. There's a black and white picture that's right there that I got when that's my dad, and you can't see it that well, but that's my dad and Willie Randolph from probably about 1978 or 9, somewhere in there, maybe 1980. And I met Willie, and that was another thing that really turned me on to baseball. He was the first player that I met, and he was my first idol. Nice. And then got to have him as a coach later with the New York Yankees. Yeah, just that kind of stuff, man. It's just I'm grateful for all of it because just like everybody else, I just grew up loving the game, and a bunch of memories followed after that.
Well, that is awesome. I love all that stuff. Thank you so much for sharing. I know for a lot of us, just hearing a lot of those things, especially in these times right now where we don't have baseball to watch and we don't have anything. We just kind of trying to grab what we can, and hopefully we get started soon. But can't thank you enough for just sharing those answers and those stories of just keeping baseball great. So I appreciate it.
You got it, Drew. It's the greatest sport in the world, man. It's my pleasure to spend some time with you today.
Indeed. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
I hope so too.
Well, thanks for listening to our interview with CJ. He is a all-around great guy. If you have a chance, look him up on Wikipedia. It's amazing the stuff that he has been a part of and has experienced. Just a lot of good insight and good stories from him in this interview, and can't thank him enough. If you're listening in, just be sure to subscribe and follow us on social media. But that's it for today. Thanks for keeping baseball great.